Walk into any bookstore today, and if you head over to the self-help aisle, it is practically screaming one very specific unified message at you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's all about, manifesting your excellence.
Right. You'll see titles that tell you, like, you are enough or unlock your inner greatness. We live in a culture that is, just absolutely obsessed with self-esteem.
We really are. The baseline assumption for, modern psychology and personal development is that human beings are fundamentally good.
Yeah. And that any problems we have are just a matter of removing the external barriers, right? Like the things holding back our innate potential.
Exactly. But what if the secret to truly knowing yourself isn't, finding your inner greatness?
What if true wisdom actually requires confronting a profound foundational rottenness? Welcome to Reform Thinking. Today we're doing a deep dive into a text that is going to aggressively challenge that modern therapeutic worldview.
Oh, aggressively is the right word. It pulls no punches.
No, it doesn't. We're looking at excerpts from a monumental 16th century work, John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion.
And we're focusing specifically on the historical and theological framework he lays out regarding, the fall of mankind and the doctrine of original sin.
Right. And look, whether you spend your weekends reading heavy theology or you're just fascinated by the different ways humans have tried to diagnose our psychology throughout history, this text offers a completely countercultural lens. It's a fascinating way to view our daily struggles and, honestly, the state of the whole world.
It is a bracing read, to say the least. This isn't a text that is satisfied with merely analyzing our behavior,
No, definitely not. It's not going to just give you a list of moral improvements to make.
Right. It operates more like a foundational diagnostic manual for the human condition. It demands that we look at the absolute core of our being.
Yeah.
But the diagnosis it hands down is one that is designed to make us profoundly uncomfortable. It strips away all those modern platitudes we use to comfort ourselves.
Which brings up this incredible paradox right in the opening sections of the source material. We talk about knowing yourself today as this journey of self-affirmation, right?
Yeah, discovering your truth.
Exactly. But this text argues that to genuinely know thyself, you have to completely abandon self-flattery.
Total abandonment.
It makes the case that true wisdom does not begin with building a positive self-image. It begins with an almost brutal humility and an unfiltered look at our internal corruption. If you are brought to your knees by what you see when you look inside, well, the text argues you haven't actually seen yourself yet.
Yeah, we have to completely redefine what the phrase know thyself actually means in this context.
Right, because it wasn't invented by modern self-help gurus.
No, not at all. The author points out that this phrase is an ancient proverb. It long predates the 16th century, let alone our modern industry. But he argues that philosophers throughout history have essentially hijacked it.
Hijacked it how? Exactly.
Well, the proverb itself is valuable, right? It would be absurd for us to understand the mechanics of the world around us, but remain ignorant of our own nature.
Because that ignorance leads to terrible self-deceptive decision-making. You're flying blind.
Exactly. But the source material draws a really sharp line between a philosophical view of self-knowledge and a theological one.
I found the critique of the philosophers here so fascinating. The text doesn't say the philosophers were ignoring human nature. It says they were applying the concept perversely.
Yes, they were using it to puff man up.
Right. When secular philosophy tells you to know yourself, the ultimate goal is almost always to recognize your own worth, your dignity and your excellence.
They want you to look inward and find a reservoir of strength.
Yeah, they want to swell you with assurance. But the text explicitly argues that assessing only our good traits, like our reason or our capabilities, gives us a wildly inaccurate map of reality. It's dangerous.
Dangerous is definitely the right word for it. The psychological comfort of that philosophical delusion is just immense.
Oh, for sure. It feels good.
It feels great. But if you look inside and only see capability, you'll naturally rely entirely on your own power. The author is essentially saying that this kind of flattering self-assessment causes you to confidently walk off a cliff, convinced you have the ability to fly.
Wow. Yeah, and human nature inherently craves this flattery, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. There is a deep psychological gravity pulling us toward anyone who tells us how great we are.
It reminds me of the way a lot of modern personality assessments function, especially in the corporate world.
Oh, like the ones you take on a retreat.
Exactly. You take a test, and the results are entirely focused on framing your traits as assets. If you're stubborn, the test calls you, resolute.
Right. Or if you're anxious, you're detail-oriented.
Yes. It's completely designed to make you feel empowered. But using that as your only metric for self-knowledge is like, it's like navigating a ship using a map that only shows the deep waters and completely leaves out the hidden reefs.
That's a great analogy.
You might feel incredibly confident at the helm, but that confidence is exactly what's going to sink you. The text warns that this alluring talk, this public extolling of human virtue, it drives the people who believe it into utter ruin.
That mapping analogy captures the peril perfectly. Because if the philosophical method is a trap of flattery, the text has to establish a completely different metric for true self-knowledge.
And how does it do that?
It introduces a very strict two-part formula. It demands that we hold two seemingly contradictory realities in our minds at the exact same time.
Okay, what's the first part?
First, we are commanded to look back at our original excellence at creation. We have to recognize what humanity was initially given. We were endowed with reason, understanding, and a spirit designed to meditate upon eternal life.
Which distinguishes us from brute beasts, right? The text is really careful not to say humanity was made as garbage.
No, not at all. We were made with a primal worthiness.
And recognizing that original design is what shows us our duty. It shows us what we were built to do, which is to exist in dependence on and worship of God.
Exactly. But we cannot stop there. The moment we recognize that primal worthiness, the second part of the formula kicks in.
The reality check.
The massive reality check. We must immediately call to mind our miserable condition after the fall. The tension between those two states is the entire point here.
So if you only look at the original design, you become arrogant and puffed up, thinking you possess that nobility right now.
Right. And if you only look at your current ruined state, you might despair and live like an animal, thinking you have no higher calling.
The text has this incredibly vivid line, noting that our primal worthiness cannot even come to mind without the sorry spectacle of our foulness and dishonor presenting itself by way of contrast.
It's all about the contrast.
It's about viewing our nobility as something we have lost. It's the difference between a billionaire looking at his bank account and a man sitting in debtor's prison looking at an old photograph of the mansion he gambled away.
Wow. Yeah, that really paints the picture.
Right. You don't brag about the mansion when you're sitting in the cell. You groan for it. You realize the devastating gap between what you were meant to be and what you currently are.
And realizing that gap is what lays low all our boasting. It overwhelms us with our lack of ability.
It's a harsh mirror.
It really is. When we scrutinize ourselves according to the standard of divine judgment, rather than the standard of human philosophy, we find absolutely nothing to lift our hearts to self-confidence.
I do want to push back on this framework a bit, just thinking about how a modern listener might receive this.
Sure, yeah. It's a lot to take in.
Emphasizing our miserable want and dishonor to the point of being, as the text says, reduced to naught. I mean, doesn't that just create paralysis?
It sounds like a psychological disaster to our modern ears, certainly.
Yeah. If someone genuinely internalizes that they are a completely ruined creature with no inherent ability to do good, it sounds like a recipe for absolute despair. How is destroying someone's self-esteem actually productive for you?
Well, within the theological framework the text is building, this reduction to naught is not the final destination. It is just the necessary demolition before reconstruction can begin.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
The author argues that from this profound humility, even from a sense of self-abhorrence, a new zeal is kindled. As long as you believe you have even a little bit of strength or goodness left in your own reserves, you will try to save yourself.
You'll keep relying on your own broken tools.
Exactly.
So it's about forcing a complete surrender.
Complete surrender. When you are entirely stripped of confidence in your own ability, you are finally driven to look outside of yourself. You are driven to seek God, in whom you can recover those good things which you have utterly lost.
Ah, I see. So the destruction of self-esteem is productive here because it removes the false hope that you are your own savior.
Precisely. It clears out the delusion so the actual cure can be applied.
So the takeaway for anyone listening is a radical reevaluation of where you anchor your confidence. In this framework, wisdom isn't believing you can conquer the world if you just hustle hard enough, you know?
Right.
Wisdom is understanding the terrifying depth of your own limitations. It's realizing that trusting your own instincts without first acknowledging your foundational brokenness is pretty much the definition of ignorance.
Which naturally leads to the next massive question the text has to address.
How did we get here?
Exactly. If our current state is a tragic fall from that original pristine design, what was the mechanism of that fall? How did we get from being perfectly designed creatures to being fundamentally corrupt?
This is where the source material dives into the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. And I appreciate that it immediately dismisses the Sunday school, the flannel graph version of the story that most of us grew up with.
Oh, absolutely. The text calls the common idea that Adam's sin was just gluttonous, intemperance, childish.
Yeah, like it was just a dietary lapse.
The author has very little patience for that idea. The notion that Adam just saw a piece of fruit, got hungry, and lacked self-control to avoid it when he had an entire garden of other food available. It's a massive trivialization of the event.
Right, because the tree of the knowledge of good and evil wasn't really about the fruit at all, was it?
No, it was a test of obedience.
The prohibition was placed there, specifically to prove whether Adam was willing to remain under God's command. The tree was a boundary marker.
Yes. The text suggests that the very name of the tree was meant to keep man content with his lot, preventing him from becoming puffed up with a wicked desire to know more than he was supposed to know.
So the anatomy of this first sin, as the text breaks it down, is entirely psychological and spiritual, not physical.
Entirely. The root of the fall wasn't the action of the hand taking the fruit. It was unfaithfulness in the mind. The text focuses heavily on the serpent's deceit, pointing out that Eve was led away from God's word through a fundamental disbelief.
And Adam didn't just revolt because he wanted a snack. He revolted because he became contemptuous of the truth and turned aside to falsehood.
I think this is a crucial distinction. By disbelieving God's word, Adam shook off all reverence for his maker.
It's not a story about a child sneaking a cookie before dinner. We tend to frame sin that way, right? Like a minor infraction of the rule.
Yeah, just a little slip up.
But the text is framing this as absolute treason. Imagine a child who doesn't just steal a cookie, but takes a sledgehammer to the lock on the pantry because they have decided the parent is a tyrant, that the parent is actively withholding good things from them, and that the child themselves should be the sovereign ruler of the house.
That is a coup d'etat, not a moment of weak willpower.
Exactly. The element of treason is exactly what the author emphasizes here. This unfaithfulness bred ambition, pride, and supreme ungratefulness.
The text calls it a monstrous wickedness, that a creature formed out of the dust of the earth would think it a small matter to be made in the likeness of God, and instead demand to be equal with God.
It was a bid for absolute, unfettered autonomy.
Adam spurned the immense bounty he was given because he could not stomach being a subordinate.
And the text pushes even further into the psychology of this rebellion, noting that it was joined with, quote, vile reproaches against God. Adam didn't just walk away. He assented to Satan's slanders.
He aligned himself with the accusation that God was acting out of falsehood, envy, and ill will. He believed the lie that God was holding him back.
To illustrate how profound this mental shift was, the author brings in a quote from Bernard of Clairvaux, which adds a brilliant historical layer to the argument.
The Bernard quote is so striking. He teaches that today, the door of salvation is open to us when we receive the gospel with our ears. But in the garden, death was admitted into humanity through those exact same windows.
That is a staggering image.
It really is. Death entered through the ear when it was open to the serpent.
So death didn't enter through the mouth when they ate. It entered through the ear when they listened.
The entire catastrophe started with entertaining a lie. Adam would never have dared to oppose God's authority unless he had first dismissed God's word as untrustworthy. Disbelieving the word is what extinguished the fear of God.
And the text notes that once that bridle of reverence was gone, humanity threw itself wildly wherever its lust carried it.
Right. The restraint was totally shattered.
So, if you are listening to this right now, the paradigm shift being offered here is about how you view human failure, both your own and the failure of society at large.
Yes, looking at the root cause.
According to this framework, the root of our profound societal and personal dysfunction isn't just behavioral. It's not about lacking education or needing better habits. The root is a foundational desire for absolute autonomy.
It is the inherited urge to be the sovereign ruler of our own reality, rather than trusting any authority above us.
It positions sin as a rebellion of the mind and the heart long before it manifests as an action.
Which makes total sense regarding Adam. He committed treason, he suffered the consequences. The logic holds up perfectly for him.
But this is where the text moves into territory that I think the modern mind violently rejects.
Oh, this is the sticking point for so many people.
The author claims that Adam's choice, made at the dawn of human history, inherently corrupts you and me today. We are held responsible for an ancestor's treason. How does the text justify this contagion? Like, how does a choice made thousands of years ago infect a child born today?
This brings us to the doctrine of original sin, and the text defends this doctrine by walking through a major historical theological controversy. It begins by establishing the stakes. Adam's estrangement from God wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was the spiritual death of his soul.
And because he was the steward of creation, his fall brought a curse upon the entire world.
The text references the idea that all of creation is currently groaning, subject to corruption because humanity perverted the whole order of nature.
The environment itself is fractured because the stewards of the environment rebelled.
Precisely. The text defines original sin as the deprivation of a nature previously good and pure. But the battleground historically has always been about the mechanism of that deprivation. How does it get to us?
And to explain this, the author brings up the Pelagian heresy. Let's spend some time on Pelagius, because his view is so incredibly relevant.
It really is. I mean, Pelagius was an ascetic monk in the early church, and honestly, if you listen to his arguments, he sounds like like a modern motivational speaker.
Yeah, a lot of hustle culture vibes there.
Exactly. He essentially championed the idea of human capability and free will in its most absolute sense. He argued that we are all born as blank slates, perfectly capable of choosing good or evil, just as Adam was before the fall.
So in the Pelagian view, sin doesn't spread through a corrupted nature, it spreads merely by imitation.
Right. We just see bad behavior modeled by our parents and our society, and we copy it. It's an environmental problem, not a genetic one.
Pelagius quibbled that sin was transmitted through imitation, not propagation. It's a highly appealing view because it preserves our sense of inherent dignity and absolute free will.
It tells us that if we just try harder, if we just set up better societal structures and better examples, we can achieve perfection.
But the source text views this as a deadly deception. It argues that through this subtlety, Satan attempted to cover up the true depths of the disease, rendering it incurable by convincing us it's just a surface-level behavioral issue.
The author absolutely dismantles Pelagius here, and he leans heavily on the Apostle Paul and King David to do it. He points out that Paul teaches sin and death spread to all men, not just because they imitated Adam, but because all sinned in Adam.
The scriptural defense is really robust. The author goes to Psalm 51, where David famously confesses, "Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me."
And the text makes a crucial interpretive point here. David is not insulting his parents or calling the act of conception sinful.
Right. He is confessing his own inherent, deep-seated perversity from the very moment of his existence.
He is saying, before I could ever imitate anyone, before I could observe bad behavior, I was already thoroughly corrupted.
This is used to prove that sin is an inborn defect. It is propagated through our nature, not merely copied through our behavior.
To make this abstract theology concrete, the text uses this powerful agricultural metaphor. It frames Adam as the root of human nature.
The argument is that God didn't just give gifts to Adam as a private individual. He entrusted to Adam the gifts for the entire human race. Adam was the federal head, the representative.
The rotten root and rotten branches metaphor is essential for understanding the Reformed perspective here. The text insists we must hold that Adam was not only the progenitor, but the root.
So when he lost those original gifts of purity and spiritual life, he lost them for everyone.
The logic is simple but devastating. When the root of a tree rots, the branches that grow out of it are inherently rotten, and they in turn transmit that rottenness to every twig that sprouts from them. The disease is systemic to the organism.
The author reinforces this by showing how a Pelagian view actually destroys the Christian understanding of salvation.
Oh, this is a brilliant logical move on his part.
Right. If sin is just imitation, if we only fall because we copy Adam, then the logical parallel is that we are only saved by copying Christ. Christ's righteousness would just be a good example for us to try and mimic.
And if salvation is just mimicking Christ, well, we are all doomed because we lack the capacity to mimic perfection. The text argues that Christ's grace and life are actually communicated or transfused into us spiritually.
Therefore, for the parallel to hold true, Adam's ruin and death must have also been communicated or transfused into our nature. We inherit Adam's guilt just as believers inherit Christ's righteousness.
I see the theological symmetry, but I have to interject with a practical objection that the text itself anticipates.
Okay, let's hear.
If a parent is a devout believer, if they have had Christ's grace communicated to them and their nature has been spiritually cleansed, why wouldn't they pass that purity down to their children?
Oh, that's a great point. If we accept the premise that we inherit genetic spiritual rottenness from our ancestors, why don't the children of righteous parents inherit spiritual purity?
It is the most natural question to ask, and the text addresses it by drawing a razor-sharp distinction between biological nature and supernatural grace.
The author states plainly that children descend from their parents' carnal generation, not from their spiritual regeneration.
It's drawing a boundary between what biology can do and what only God can do. The text quotes Augustine to back this up. Augustine pointed out that whether a man is a guilty unbeliever or an innocent forgiven believer, he still begets guilty children.
Why? Because he begets them from a nature that remains fundamentally corrupted in its fleshly state. Guilt and corruption are tied to our biological nature, but sanctification, that purity, is a supernatural override that is not bound to our DNA.
Think about it like a severe genetic predisposition. Say you are born with a genetic defect that causes profound blindness, and medical science allows you to get a highly experimental, complex surgery to restore your sight.
The surgery is a total miracle for you.
But when you have children, they are still going to inherit the genetic code for blindness. You cannot pass down the surgery through your DNA.
Ah, I love that analogy. The surgery was an outside, unnatural intervention on your condition. Your underlying genetic code, what the text calls your carnal generation, remains what it is and gets passed down.
That framing clarifies the text's argument perfectly. The restorative grace is the outside intervention. The underlying corrupt nature is what gets propagated biologically.
The implication for the listener is profound. It means you are not a blank slate. You are not just a product of a bad environment or flawed societal structures. You entered this world with a fundamental, inherited predisposition that naturally curves inward, away from God and towards self.
And having established that this condition is inherited, the text takes us even deeper into the darkness. It moves from the transmission of the disease to detailing the actual symptoms.
Right. How deep does this depravity go?
The text begins to define what theologians later term total depravity, and it is an unsparing assessment. It is the complete opposite of a flattering assessment.
The formal definition the author provides for original sin is a hereditary depravity and corruption of our nature, diffused into all parts of the soul. There are two major pillars to this definition that we need to unpack.
Let's start with the first pillar. It's the issue of culpability. The text argues that we are justly condemned for our own inborn seed of sin, not just arbitrarily punished for something Adam did.
And it unflinchingly applies this even to infants.
This is often the most jarring concept for modern readers. The text is completely uncompromising. It argues that we are not merely bearing the guilt of Adam's offense as innocent bystanders catching collateral damage.
The contagion imparted by Adam resides in us as an active corruption, which the text says justly deserves punishment on its own merits. It states that even infants carry their condemnation with them from the mother's womb.
Which feels entirely counterintuitive to how we view babies today as the ultimate symbol of innocence.
But the text is maintaining absolute logical consistency within its framework. If the root is rotten, the seed itself is rotten. The author argues that infants are guilty not of another's fault, but of their own inherent nature.
Because their entire nature is a seed of sin, it is inherently hateful and abhorrent to the absolute purity of God, even before they have the physical capacity to commit an active outward sin. The corruption is latent, but it is real.
That leads directly into the second pillar of the definition. This latent corruption doesn't stay latent. The text says this perversity never ceases. It continually bears new fruits, what the Apostle Paul calls the works of the flesh.
The author uses two deeply evocative metaphors here. He compares our corrupt nature to a burning furnace that constantly throws off flames and sparks, and to a water spring that ceaselessly bubbles up from the ground.
The emphasis is on the ceaseless, involuntary nature of our corruption. Our nature is so fertile and fruitful of every evil that it cannot remain idle. We don't just occasionally stumble into sin. We produce it as naturally as a furnace produces heat.
To really drive this point home about how extensive this corruption is, the author takes a massive detour to attack a specific theologian named Peter Lombard.
Who was Lombard, and why did the author feel the need to aggressively tear down his specific view of sin?
Peter Lombard was a highly influential medieval scholastic theologian. His writings were essentially the standard textbook for theology before the Reformation.
Oh, so he was a big deal.
A huge deal. And Lombard tried to soften the blow of original sin by arguing that it was mostly localized to the flesh, by which he meant our lower appetites, our sensuality, and our physical urges.
In Lombard's view, the mind, the reason, and the higher faculties of the human soul were wounded, but relatively intact.
I can see why Lombard's view would be popular. It allows us to say, yes, my bodily urges get out of control, but the core of who I am, my intellect, my reason, is still basically good and seeking the truth.
It confines the sickness to the basement of the house while keeping the living room clean. But this text completely rejects that safety net.
The author accuses Lombard of betraying a complete ignorance of human nature. The text argues that the whole man is overturned. It says that when Adam deserted the fountain of righteousness, unspeakable impiety didn't just affect his body, it occupied the very citadel of his mind, and pride penetrated to the deepest recesses of his heart.
The mind is given over to blindness. The heart is given over to depravity. The whole man is overwhelmed as by a deluge from head to foot. No part is immune.
I look at Lombard's view like a computer with a cracked screen. The screen is your physical urges. It's annoying, it distorts how you interact with the world, but the hard drive is fine. The CPU is operating perfectly. You just need to manage the broken screen.
That's really good. But the text's view, total depravity, is that you have a systemic malware virus. The virus hasn't just cracked the screen. It has infected the CPU, the motherboard, the memory, and every single line of code in the operating system.
Yes. Your reason, your logic, your emotions, they are all running through a corrupted processor. You can't just fix the hardware because the core software is compromised.
That is a phenomenal way to understand what the text means when it uses the term concupiscence. The author states that whatever is in man, from the understanding to the will, from the soul even to the flesh, has been defiled and crammed with concupiscence. In fact, he makes the breathtaking claim that the whole man is, of himself, nothing but concupiscence.
We need to pause here because concupiscence is a heavy theological word. We need to translate this for the listener.
Yeah, please do. If the whole man is nothing but concupiscence, what does that actually look like on a random Tuesday afternoon? What is this malware doing in everyday life?
We tend to think of concupiscence or depravity as only applying to horrific, scandalous crimes. But in this framework, concupiscence is a deep, foundational, disordered yearning that infects even our best actions. It means our default operational setting is always self-interest, self-preservation, and self-glorification.
Let's play this out. It means that on a Tuesday afternoon, when you do a favor for a coworker, taking an hour out of your day to help them with a project, you aren't doing it out of pure, unadulterated love.
Deep down in the code, the malware is running.
You are hoping the boss notices your teamwork so you get a promotion. Or you are doing it so that the coworker owes you a favor later. Or at the very least, you're doing it so you can feel a warm sense of moral superiority about what a good person you are.
Exactly. It's the subtle, constant twisting of our desires. We are incapable of loving God purely for who he is, and we are incapable of loving our neighbor purely for their sake.
The gravitational pull of our soul is always curving inward, bending every action back toward our own ego.
Even our highest intellect is used to rationalize our own selfish desires. Even our noblest charitable intentions are tainted by a desire for recognition or a fear of punishment. Concupiscence means that the water coming out of the spring is poisoned at the source, no matter how clear it looks in the cup.
The listener takeaway here is an invitation to ruthless self-honesty. Our flaws aren't just surface-level behavioral mistakes that we can habit hack our way out of. We're operating with a deeply compromised internal operating system.
Which, naturally, leads to a massive theological and philosophical dilemma.
Oh, here we go.
If we are completely corrupted from head to foot, naturally producing sin like a furnace produces sparks, doesn't that mean God, who created our nature, is ultimately the author of this mess?
It is the ultimate human defense mechanism. I was born this way. My nature made me do it. God created my nature. Therefore, it is God's fault.
But the text anticipates this and vehemently shuts down this line of thinking. It argues fiercely that we cannot write God's name upon our faults.
The author quotes the book of Ecclesiastes here. God made man upright, but they have sought out many devices.
The text insists that the ruin must be imputed entirely to the depravity of nature, not the author of nature. And to defend this logically, the author introduces a critical philosophical distinction.
He distinguishes between a substantial property and an adventitious quality.
Yes. Let's break those terms down because they are the key to unlocking how this theology avoids blaming God.
Okay, lay it out for us.
A substantial property is something that has been implanted in an object from the very beginning. It is part of the original design, the foundational blueprint. An adventitious quality is something that comes upon a thing from the outside after the fact. It is an acquired corruption.
The text argues that sin is an adventitious quality, not a substantial property. It is not in the blueprint.
Correct. The author acknowledges that we are vicious by nature now, but insists we perished solely because we degenerated from our original condition.
The text says our corruption is called natural, only because it now holds all men fast by hereditary right. It is our current natural state, but God did not design it that way.
God hates the corruption of his work, but he does not hate the work itself.
Imagine a master watchmaker crafting a pristine, incredibly complex Swiss watch. It is designed flawlessly to keep perfect time. Now imagine someone takes that beautiful watch and violently smashes it with a hammer.
The glass shatters, the gears are bent, the springs are warped.
The watch is now in a naturally broken state. It won't tell time. If you try to wind it, the broken gears might grind and destroy themselves further. But if you look at that shattered mess, you cannot blame the master watchmaker for designing a bad watch.
And to push that analogy to fit original sin, imagine that this broken watch somehow has the ability to reproduce. Any new watch it produces is going to inherit the bent gears and the shattered glass.
The brokenness is now a hereditary condition. It is natural to the offspring. But the hammer blow, the fall, was the adventitious quality. It was a violent intrusion upon a good design.
This philosophical distinction is vital because it saves this entire worldview from two major ditches.
First, it saves it from fatalism, the idea that God just made us evil so we have no choice and no responsibility.
And second, it saves it from dualism, which the text mentions by bringing up the Manichees.
The Manichees were an ancient religious sect who looked at the sheer volume of evil in human nature and concluded that there must be two gods competing against each other.
They believed in a good creator who made our pure spirits and an evil creator who made our corrupt physical substance.
The author calls this foolish trifling. They literally had to invent a second evil creator just to avoid assigning the cause of human evil to the righteous God.
But by defining sin as an adventitious corruption of a good design rather than a bad design from the start, the text maintains that there is only one God, he is entirely good, and the blame for our ruin falls squarely on human rebellion.
I love how the author handles the inevitable follow-up question here. We all want to ask, well, if God is all-powerful, why didn't he just stop the hammer blow? Why didn't he prevent Adam from falling? And the text basically tells the reader to stop whining and close their mouths.
It warns against grumbling with inordinate curiosity.
The author essentially says that going down that rabbit hole of questioning God's sovereign permissions is a distraction from our own culpability.
He writes that pious minds ought to loathe that objection. The deadly wound clings to our nature, but the wound was inflicted through our own sin.
We have no reason to complain, except against ourselves. The focus is steered firmly back to radical human accountability.
So if we synthesize this entire journey we've been on today, it paints a very specific, uncompromising picture of reality. We started by tearing down the modern idol of self-esteem.
True self-knowledge is brutal. It requires looking at the original nobility of humanity to understand what we owe our Creator, and then looking at our current ruined state to understand our complete, devastating inability to pay that debt.
We trace that ruin back to the garden, realizing that the fall wasn't a minor mistake, but a profound treasonous rebellion of the mind. It was a listening to lies and a demand for absolute autonomy that severed us from the source of life.
And that severance didn't just affect Adam, it infected the entire human race. We examined how we are not born as innocent blank slates, but as twigs on a rotten root, propagating a hereditary disease.
We are born with a nature completely corrupted from head to foot, operating on a malware of concupiscence that bends our minds away from truth and our hearts towards selfishness.
Yet despite all this darkness, the text fiercely defends the original goodness of God's design. Our depravity is a derangement of our nature, an adventitious hammer blow, leaving us fully accountable and entirely without excuse.
Which brings us back to the most critical question of all. Why on earth would anyone subject themselves to this worldview? Why go through this incredibly humbling, almost devastating exercise of self-examination that strips away all our dignity?
Because, as the text established right at the beginning, this absolute lowering of ourselves is the only mechanism that kindles a true zeal to seek God.
If you think you are mostly fine, you will only seek a minor upgrade. You'll look for a life coach. But if you realize you are completely ruined, that your very operating system is corrupted beyond self-repair, you will seek a total resurrection. You will seek a savior.
The absolute darkness of the diagnosis is the only thing that makes the cure of grace magnificent. If you don't know how terminal your disease is, you will never appreciate the physician who saves your life.
The darkness of the diagnosis makes the cure magnificent.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your week. We've spent this entire time talking about looking inward at our own corruption. But let's take this theology and aim it outward.
That's an interesting flip.
If our current, deeply frustrating human nature is an adventitious derangement, a systemic disease that has infected an original beautiful blueprint, how should that change the way you view the people around you? Think about the next time you encounter someone you profoundly disagree with, someone who acts selfishly, or someone who deeply wrongs you.
You have the exact same malware running in your own code.
Exactly. What if you view their actions not as their true original design, but as the tragic, inevitable symptoms of a shared hereditary disease? Could this brutal, uncompromising doctrine of total depravity actually be the secret key to unlocking radical empathy? It's something to think about. Thank you for joining Reformed Thinking for this challenging deep dive into the sources. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep testing your assumptions, and keep asking the hard questions. Until next time.